Thank you for tuning in once again to Gods, Demons, and Magic. This is your host, Sri Sachinandan Das. We're continuing to explore the Egyptian mysteries by Iamblichus, and in that ancient text, the Egyptian priest Abaman is explaining the nature of the gods to Porphyry. And the text begins with many questions by Porphyry, and he asks, how can we understand or categorize the gods? And one of the suggestions that is there is, can they be categorized according to the nature of their body? They all have different types of forms, both supernatural beings as well as the gods. Just as human beings have bodies which are composed primarily of earth, so similarly the supernatural beings such as the daemons have bodies composed primarily of air, and the gods themselves have bodies composed primarily of ether. Should the various supernatural beings and gods, should they be categorized according to their bodies and what their bodies are made of? And we have to understand where Porphyry is coming from. The ancient Greek cosmology, their view of the universe, was that the various elements that exist and from which we are created are born from various gods and goddesses, primordial beings that arose at the time of creation. The universe itself was considered to be an enclosed space. The god Uranos, a primordial god, and it's almost like a big sphere of brass, and on the inside of the sphere it's decorated with the various stars. And in the center of that sphere you have Gaia, or the earth, another primordial goddess. And Gaia was his consort. And within this universe there were three different types of air. There was the subterranean air within Gaia, the air of the underworld. Then there was the air that we breathe, the air that extends from the surface of Gaia, or the earth, into the heavens. And then there's the air of the heavens themselves, the air in which the planets move. And that extends all the way to the shell of the universe, or Uranos. And that lowest of airs, the airs of the subterranean realm beneath our feet, it's the air of the underworld. It's known as Erebos. It's a very dark and thick, foggy-like substance. Like if you were to somehow travel into the underworld, it would be a realm of shadow. It would be a realm where everything is very dark and pitch, barely illuminated, right? Just like you see in these video games like Resident Evil and, these very dark, creepy games where everything is murky and shadowy and foggy. That's very much what the underworld looks like. And just as the different living entities, as well as us, as well as the supernatural beings, the gods and daemons, are composed of the air of their realm, I would assume that the entities of the underworld are composed of Erebos. They're composed primarily of this mist. And if you look at the depictions of the entities from the underworld, they always have this misty sort of nature, like when Odysseus is summoning the different people from the underworld within the Odyssey. He makes that sort of he makes that pit and does a blood sacrifice within it. And the different entities from the underworld come to taste the blood, and he begins speaking to them. And they have these very ghostly, mist-like forms. And you see, typically, even in modern day, ghosts are depicted as very misty, fog-like creatures. It's almost like a little burst of fog or mist kind of moves through your room behind you while you're at your computer or watching television or something, and that's a ghost, right? So the ghost is considered to have a misty-like body. And so perhaps, at least from the Greek perspective, they have a body composed of Erebos, or the mist of the underworld. And then ourselves, we have a body composed of Gaia, or earth. And it's interesting because the human body is composed of the same elements of the earth, air and water, and almost the exact same proportions as contained within the earth itself. So we're very much creatures of Gaia, or creations of Gaia. And then the air that we breathe was considered to be the goddess Chaos. She's basically the goddess of the air. And she's also, just as Gaia and Uranos were created at the time of universal creation. So similarly, she's a primordial goddess. And she is the air that we breathe, that extends from the surface of the globe all the way up into, the beginnings of outer space. And it's very interesting because she is the mother of many children. She's the mother of Nyx, or night, as well as Hemera and day. So these are her children, day and night. The various things that you experience within the air, within our atmosphere, clouds and things like this, these are considered to be her children. And she's also the mother of the daemons. Just as we've been speaking over many podcasts about the nature of these daemons. They are supernatural beings that exist between the mankind and between the gods. And in many ways they're via mediums, they're messengers between the two. They exact the will of the gods upon mankind and upon creation. They're like sub-gods. And so, from the Greek perspective, they are children of Chaos, this goddess of the air. And so therefore their bodies are composed primarily of air. And it's interesting because the air as a substance is between the realm of men and between the realm of gods. And the daemons themselves exist between the realm of men and the realm of gods, both physically as well as like sort of their position within the universe as messengers between the two. And above this earth-bound atmospheric air, you have the ether, which is the air of the gods. And this extends from our atmosphere all the way to the shell of the universe. Essentially, it's outer space. So when you look up into the sky and you see the movements of the planets, such as Saturn or Jupiter, or you see the movements of the sun and the moon, these planets are moving through the ether. And the bodies of the gods were composed primarily of this ether. And the ancient Greeks considered this ether to be light blue in color. So when you look up in the sky in the daytime and you see the sky is blue, then they considered it to be that you're looking at the ether, you're looking at the air of the gods, which is above our own air. You're sort of looking through our atmosphere at the realm of the gods, and it's shining brilliant, it's covered in sunlight, right? Like the sun is shining and lighting up the realm of the gods, but there's this blue tint to everything because the air that they breathe and the air of which they are composed is this brilliant light blue shining substance. And then when the sun is setting and the sky begins to darken, they considered that to be the goddess Nyx, who is the goddess of the night, and she's sort of pulling a veil between our atmospheric air and between the realm of the gods. She's basically covering the realm of the gods from our vision with a veil of darkness. And then when Hemera, or day, comes again, then all of that veil of night, that veil of darkness, is then dispersed. And there are some very interesting corollaries between this ancient Greek worldview and that of India, and that the Indians also believed in this subterranean underworld-like realm. And then you have the realm of Bhuloka, which is the realm of the earth. It's where we live. And this realm was considered to extend until the highest birds can fly, so a few hundred feet. And then above that began Bhuvaloka, which is the realm of these supernatural beings. Like when airplanes are flying, the ancient Indians would consider that they're flying through Bhuvaloka. And Bhuvaloka is a place of spirits and supernatural beings. At least they exist, within a different dimension. But that's their realm. So these Rakshasas and ghosts and various types of what we would call, from the Greek perspective, daemons, that was their place of living. And then above that, up into outer space, then you have Svaloka, which is the realm of the gods. So it's a very interesting corollary between the two. And so Porphyry is essentially saying that, if you look at the universe, you see that there's all these different entities that inhabit different parts of the universe made with different bodies, in harmony with those parts. So can we categorize the gods like this, just as we categorize the universe itself and structure it according to the elements which are prominent in various places? So is this how we should understand the gods? And Porphyry is answered by Abamen with an emphatic no, that you can't do this. You cannot categorize the gods or even understand them according to what their bodies are made of, because the gods exist independently of their bodies. See, we, and as well as other supernatural beings, we're bound by our bodies, and therefore we're very much within them. But the gods are not within their bodies. They exist outside of their body. And the body itself is just a temporary tool being used by that particular god. And so because the gods are not bound within those bodies, they can't be categorized according to those bodies. So the way that God relates to his body is he just manifests it as he needs it. It's sort of like he's a powerful illumination that exists beyond and surrounding the body, and the body is existing within him rather than him existing within the body. And the body is simply a manifestation of his power. nor is it like other bodies in that because it's a manifestation of the power of the God, it's exceptionally pure. It's like it doesn't operate according to the principles of other bodies. It's kind of, you might say, it's not bound by nature. It really just operates according to his will, and he can manifest it or unmanifest it as he likes. And we see that the gods are shapeshifters. They can manifest their body in whatever form they like and change it, nor does their body interact with nature in the same way that ours does, nor is it bound by nature itself. And so because the gods are essentially unembodied or beyond the body and simply manifesting it for various purposes, you shouldn't really identify them with their bodies. You have to, when you're thinking of the gods, you have to have this higher perspective of who and what they are. And this should also cause within you a certain sense of reverence. And he's a little bit upset with the question, you're sort of identifying the gods with their bodies, and that's a kind of lower conception, and it shows that you don't have the right reverence towards the gods. And similarly, we ourselves are also considered to be beyond our bodies. We don't exist within our bodies. We're a pure spiritual being, and we existed prior to creation. And yet we're very much, our consciousness, as mentioned before in previous podcasts, our consciousness is really bound up within this body. We experience the universe through the body. We see through the eyes and smell through the nose, and we're really locked within it, and our consciousness can't expand beyond it. But with the gods, it's not the same thing. It's like their consciousness expanded everywhere, and when you see a body, even though it may look like ours, they're not bound within it, nor are they experiencing reality through it in the way that we are. And this is consistent with their position as controllers, right? They exist beyond these bodies. They're not bound by them because they're the ones that control nature itself. When we as souls are locked within a body, we're bound by it. But the gods cannot be bound by nature because they're the ones who control nature. And Abamen gives us an amazing illustration of how the gods are interacting with the world and interacting with us. He compares them to the sun. And just as the sun is sitting there, above the earth, shining out brilliantly its rays and touching everything with its rays and seeing everything by its own light, so similarly the gods are sort of shining out with their own brilliance, with their own power, and touching everything within the world and seeing everything as well. And everything that they touch and see with sort of their rays of consciousness is affected by them. Say, for example, you have a stone, like on a mountainside, and the sun has been shining on it all day long, then gradually that stone starts to become heated, right? It becomes warm. That's why you see cold-blooded animals like reptiles, they like to sit on the stones, because the sun has, in a sense, imbued that stone with its power throughout the day. And so similarly, when they shine their consciousness on a certain object, it becomes warmed by them, right? It becomes penetrated by them, and it becomes imbued with their power. So you could see, if the gods were to touch something or focus on a particular religious object, it becomes heated by the concentration of their consciousness. And these various things which the gods are illuminating with their consciousness, just as the sun is illuminating all things and touching things with its sunlight, these are the various things that they have power over, that they have control over, and that it's their responsibility to deal with and interact with. And so they'll not only see, just as the sun is touching the rock, they'll not only see the rock, but they'll also see the lizard on the rock, or they'll see us come and, shoo away the lizard and sit on the rock. They're shining upon us as well. And again, as mentioned before, their attitude is one of benevolence and kindness. So for the ancient Egyptian, we're all sort of sitting within the light of the gods and being felt by them and perceived by them, and also being invested with their powers if we can call their attention to us. We can be heated through the practice of theurgy, just as that rock is heated by the focus of the sun's light. We can be heated by the light of the focus of the consciousness of the god upon us. And so theurgy or magic ritual is actually used to call down the consciousness of the god upon you, or to call down the consciousness of the god onto a particular object and invest that object with the light and the heat of that god. And this is an essential principle in all religions. For example, in monotheistic traditions, you'll see the idea is that you offer prayers to God, and you offer worship and ritual to God, you offer services to God, and in this way you're essentially absorbing your consciousness in God, you're absorbing your mind in God, and when you do that, then God reciprocates by being absorbed in you. To the degree that you're conscious of God, God is conscious of you. And so if you're very conscious of God, like you're constantly absorbed in Him, then you'll actually, as He puts His attention more and more upon you, and especially with an attitude of mercy and benevolence towards you, in reciprocation with your own attitude of meekness and humility and a desire to serve, then one will find themselves being overwhelmed by the glory of God, or saturated with His power and His mercy and the ecstasy of His attention. And this is essentially what a great saint is. It's someone that's constantly absorbing themselves in God, like they're always floating in the river or the ocean of God. And in this way they take on the very qualities of God, just as that rock is taking on the qualities of the sun. Imagine if a rock was sitting in the sun and drawing the sun's power to it so intensely that the rock became red hot. Or imagine, you take like an iron rod and you put an iron rod into fire, and it'll absorb the qualities of the fire. The iron rod will eventually become red hot. And whatever you touch with that iron rod, it'll burst into flames, like a piece of paper or a pile of cotton or something, and immediately ignite it. So similarly, a saint is someone that's made themselves red hot in God consciousness by essentially practicing. It takes a lot of practice to get oneself to be able to think of God constantly or to constantly worship God. But once one does, then one becomes like a firebrand, and then when a great saint interacts with the world, he ignites it in love of God or in God consciousness. And that's essentially what these mystics are doing as well in ancient Egypt. They're drawing either the consciousness of God or the consciousness of the gods, which is also a sort of a reflection of the consciousness of the one supreme God, onto themselves through mystical rituals and through the performance of ritualized worship, and also imbuing certain objects with that same light. And so really there's not much difference between traditional systems of religion when you understand them and these different mystical practices of drawing the consciousness of the divine onto yourself. And another interesting quality of sunlight is it's always connected to the sun. Even it may be a nice warm, ray of light upon your hand, but if you are able to somehow grab that ray of light and sort of climb up it like a fireman's pole or something, it'll eventually go to the burning hot surface of the sun. It never can be disconnected from the sun, right? You can't grab a ray of sunlight and break it in half. As soon as you put up your hand or something, that's where the sunlight stops. It doesn't continue. So in the same way, the light and heat or the consciousness, the power of a particular God, it's always inherently connected to that God and cannot be separated from that God. And so the quality of sunlight is that it's always extending from the sun, and yet it warms and enriches various objects without ever being taken away from the sun or broken from the sun. For example, like here where I live in Los Angeles, you have the Santa Ana winds. That's when the warm air from the desert, from the Mojave Desert, blows into the Los Angeles basin. So, what is that warm air? Well, you have the air is not moving. It's just sitting there in the desert. It's being heated by the sunlight. It's being invested with the warmth of the sun. And then it kind of blows into the city and it becomes very hot. So the sun is shining through that air and warming it, and yet the sun is never really touched by the air. Like the sunlight itself is unaffected by the air. So in the same way, the gods, they can sort of invest their energy within something and warm it up by their power, but they're never actually interacting with or touching that particular object or person. They're shining through it. They're untouched by it. And yet by shining through that object or that person, they're warming it up. That influence of the god begins to pervade that object. And so the gods are always in, that's when, it mentions the gods are independent. That's what it means. It means that they shine through everything, and yet they're untouched by everything, just as the sunlight is penetrating that desert air, and it's untouched by the air. It's shining through the air into the surface of the earth, and yet because it's passing through the air is responding to it and being warmed by it. So that's the nature of the gods. Their light is sort of pervading everything, and it's influencing everything and sort of illuminating everything or warming everything with the consciousness and power of the God, and yet the consciousness and power of the God is untouched. It's completely independent of the things that it interacts with. And continuing with the analogy of the sun, Abamen makes a very beautiful and amazing statement that there is only one light, there's only one divine light, and all the gods are sharing and manifesting that one light. It's not that each individual God is a sun unto itself, shining out its own light and brilliance. Rather, there is only one divine sun, and all the gods are simply shining out the light of that one sun. And as we mentioned in previous podcasts, specifically the three suns, the Neoplatonic view was that you had the one transcendent realm of brilliant light, which in the Indian traditions is called Brahman, by the Greeks the good or the one is understood to be the light of God. And so this light of the transcendent realm, it sort of shines into creation through the demiurge, or the secondary creator, who Neoplatonists identified with the sun god. So the sun god himself is then illuminating he's taking that transcendent light of the spiritual platform and then shining it through himself into the realm of the gods and illuminating the gods themselves. And then the gods then utilize that light and that knowledge and that power, that beauty, to then manifest and conduct creation according to divine purpose. And then, of course, the sun god comes down once again into the terrestrial realm or the earthly realm as the sun planet itself, which is illuminating this world that we live in and giving it life and sustenance and warmth and light. So there's this sense that the sun god is taking the divine realm of transcendence, that pure, beautiful, spiritual, blissful light, and then bringing it into the realm of the gods and illuminating all the gods with it. And so then it is that light which then the gods manifest and share in throughout the universe. And it's that light that they then focus with their consciousness upon certain individuals or objects, or they focus it upon that particular aspect of reality in which they are in charge. And Abamen says something incredible, that essentially the whole universe is revolving around the sun. So just take a moment and think, imagine looking up into the sky and seeing the sun, but then seeing revolving around it in a big circle, a whole bunch of clouds. Imagine they're moving clockwise in a big chakra or wheel around the sun, and they're just moving around and around and around. And so in the same way, the whole universe and everything within it is moving around this divine sun. You have the divine realm of transcendence, which is then shining into matter through the sun god and manifesting, illuminating the realm of the gods. And then that same light, it shines and pervades untouched through the whole universe, warming it, right? Just like that desert heat, and then causes the universe itself to move in a wheel around the sun. And as things move in a wheel, all the beginnings and ends of things are joined together. Like there's a way in which the universe itself is harmonized together as one being, as one action, and all things are brought together in unity, and then all things are brought in equal proportion. It's kind of like the world is brought into order, and all things connect to each other due to the power of this divine light, and it revolves like a wheel around the sun. So this is, of course, seen in many ancient traditions, those of ancient Greek, ancient India, as the sun wheel. You have this revolution, this divine wheel of the universe moving around the power of transcendence in a circular fashion. And then Abamen says, because all of these things are moving in this kind of divine circle around the transcendent source or this divine illumination, that this is why the universe is ordered in a circular fashion, like in terms of the rotation of the planets, the movements of day and night, the spheres of the universe and the astrological implications, how the planets interact with each other. It's all happening in these gigantic circles, right? And so this is because the universe itself is in essence moving in a gigantic circle around the divine transcendent source, which illuminates the world through the gods. And if you look up into the sky and you see this kind of gigantic whirling wheel of clouds moving and the sun in the middle of the wheel, you may think that the sun is actually within the clouds, or it's there in the middle of the wheel. And for all intents and purposes, it is, like the wheel is being caused by the presence of the sun. It's moving the weather and everything like that. And yet the sun is actually not within the wheel. The sun is very far from the wheel, thousands and thousands of miles. And the sun is untouched by the wheel. So similarly, the source of creation is actually transcendental to creation. It exists, in the transcendent realm, far, far away from the weather patterns of this world. And yet the weather patterns of the world and the movements of this world and the harmony and order of this world as it moves in a circle, which the circle is a shape, representing harmony and unity, right? And so the sort of harmony, the wholeness, the oneness of this world is ultimately based upon that transcendent source which exists beyond the world. And this also reminds me of these ancient domed temples that especially you find in Egypt and Greece, where you enter into the sacred space and you look up and there's this beautiful vaulted ceiling reaching towards the pinnacle. And then in the pinnacle they have an open hole. And that open hole represents the sun. The sunlight will directly shine into the temple from that. And the sun, of course, is the manifestation of God or the divine or the transcendent platform. And the dome itself you can consider to be analogous to the spiritual process, the process of yoga or transcendence or mysticism, where you sort of wind your way gradually, oftentimes in a spiraled staircase is the usual symbolism. You're winding your way up the dome into the higher and higher levels of consciousness until you get to the very source itself, which is that bright, luminous sun, shining in through the hole. And yet you may think that the sun is at the top of the ceiling, but it's not. You actually have to climb through the hole. You have to actually leave the world behind to enter into transcendence. So you can imagine yourself standing there, looking upward into the sky, almost like in the eye of a hurricane, and seeing this mass of huge billowing white clouds moving around the sun very slowly in an ordered fashion. But imagine those clouds then all of a sudden transform into all the things that you have ever seen or heard of or experienced in the world, names and faces and forms and trees and plants and buildings, cities, countries, planets, everything moving and revolving around this brilliant light of the transcendent sun, everything brought into order and harmony into a large circle. And then imagine that the sun, just as the sun is electrifying and illuminating the clouds, so the sun is actually illuminating everything within reality. The sun is shining through the cities and the trees and the people, and everything you've ever seen and everything you've ever experienced, everyone you've ever loved, has been illuminated by that light. And it's actually that light which is shining through the world which causes us to love the world and be attracted to the world. Just as that warm desert wind was given its warmth by the presence of the sun shining through it. So similarly, everything in the world is given its beauty, it's given its substance, its source, by the power of this divine light shining through it. And of course, such a vision as this, the universe revolving around the sun, it'd be a powerful vision. It would burn your face, right? The sun is this divine sun and the power of the gods sort of manifesting that power through matter and illuminating matter and giving life to creation. There's going to be thunderbolts and lightning. The air would be crackling with electricity all around this vision. And so this is an incredibly powerful symbol. And as we mentioned, you'll see it all throughout the world in the form of various sun disks and sun wheels. And that's essentially what it represents. It's the world in relationship to the transcendent realm. So thank you very much for listening. If you found value in this, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, please visit srisachinandana.com/iTunes and leave a positive review. Thank you again, and we hope you'll join us next time on Gods, Demons, and Magic.